Watch. I'm just gonna give it a second. Okay, there we go. Okay, so just want to let everybody know thank you for joining us as a facilitator for the Medical Apartheid Book Club. We're really excited to have all of our second year med students participating this year. The goal of this brief talk today is just to kind of get everybody up to date and answer questions about expectations specifically around the facilitator session, but also give a big overview of what the afternoon will look like. So I'm just going to open up a quick PowerPoint that shows our session. You guys can see my PowerPoint currently? Perfect. So just to kind of give you a quick overview of what the afternoon will look like in structure. So first of all, just to remind everybody, it's going to be on August 27th. It'll start at 1 p.m. And the afternoon, roughly, we're kind of sketched to be from 1 to 4 o'clock. I think we'll get done before that 3-hour limit, just based on how much time we've put in each of these sections. But we didn't want to go past 4 p.m. because I know our students always like to not go past the time period in which we state. But this is just going to be the overview structure of the afternoon. So as students come in, we're going to actually have a word cloud that's going to be starting just kind of as a warm up. So we probably will start closer to 1:05 or so.
Andy, your PowerPoint went away.
Okay, thank you. Let me open that up again. Is it back up now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. So just wanted to give an overview of what the afternoon will look like. Like I said, it's going to be on August 27th, starting at 1 o'clock. We're sketched till 4 o'clock, but we'll probably stop before then. And these are going to be the points that we're going to go through the afternoon. So as students come in, we will have a word cloud that's going to pop up. So it'll be kind of an interactive component that starts. Just so you guys know, the word cloud question is going to be, what is a one-word expression of your emotion after reading Medical Apartheid by Harriet Washington? And so if you haven't seen a word cloud before, I'll be using Poll Everywhere, and students will basically be able to text with their cell phone one-word emotions, and that'll become part of a word cloud or a collection of words. The larger words represent repeated statements, and that'll just be a way to warm up our students as they're coming into the room. Hopefully, we'll have everybody in the room by 1:05, and then we're going to just do a brief overview of where we're going, and I'll just walk you through those slides in a minute. I'll be giving that piece of the discussion. And then before we actually go into our small group sessions, we're really lucky this year to have Felisa Savage, who will be giving us a brief talk about reflection and mindfulness. Our idea behind this is, as I go through our intro, our goal for our students is kind of walk them through 3 different processes. First, awareness, so helping them kind of recognize the historical and current impact of racism on the practice of medicine. Reflection, so they've been doing some reflection as they've been reading over the course of the summer, but we also wanted to give them some other tools around reflection, and Felicia will be focusing in her background of doing anti-racism yoga, of thinking about how can you practice reflection beyond this session. Then we'll go into the small group session. That'll be a 90-minute kind of section, and that'll be the bulk of what you as facilitators will be participating in. And then when the students come back, Felicia will be leading us in a mindfulness activity, most partially to kind of be a opportunity for wellness and self-care, as well as practicing some of those things she had taught before we went into the small group session. And then we'll end with a call to action, really focusing on this idea, which is the last piece, which is a commitment. So what is the next step in your journey towards anti-racism? And we'll be asking all of our students to kind of identify in the chat one kind of action step that they will do next. So just real quickly to kind of walk you through kind of 10,000-foot overview. So we'll be doing the word cloud, and then I'll be kind of setting the stage, kind of talking a little bit about this kind of disunity of like how we view the history of medicine and then what the actual history of medicine looks like. Obviously using this picture of Marion Sims and how we kind of have glorified him as a hero of medicine, but also knowing a little bit about his history as it's talked about significantly in the book. I'll be focusing a little bit on Harriet Washington's, what I would say is kind of the synthesis statement, where she talks about how hospitals have been kind of embedded, and medicine has been embedded in the African-American consciousness, not as places of hope always, but as places of terror, violence, and shame. And then I'm going to walk them through this process of what we're looking for them to do, which is the ARC model, thinking about the tools of awareness, reflection, and commitment, and ultimately asking them to think about why is this important? More than a superficial, I understand history and it's really shocking, but look, how do we go deeper in thinking about moving towards relationships and commitment to action? And then we'll transition over to Felicia, giving us this discussion around mindfulness and reflection. And then before we go into the small group session, I will be setting the stage a little bit, giving ground rules. So trying to have our students understand that this is going to be a session in which we are going to be talking about topics that can be triggering for some of our students, as well as emotionally charged. And so how can we care for everybody in the room? And we're going to use the Aspire ground rules. So Mario Curtis Brown actually shared this with us last year as a tool that he likes to use. And so these will be the steps that we'll be asking our students. So I'll go over this, but we'll also, once again, before we start our sessions and individual groups, set these ground rules just so they know. And ultimately, the goal of this is for people to speak from their own perspective, not dominate the conversation, ask some of those who kind of sit in the background to speak up, and to make sure that we're listening and respecting everybody as we're having this discussion. Then we're going to go into the small group, and I'm going to set the stage for what the students will expect. And this is going to be the general flow of our small group discussion. We're going to start as facilitators, once again, making sure everybody feels comfortable with the ground rules. And then we wanted to set the stage by making sure that everybody starts by speaking and introducing themselves. So we'll ask everybody to go around the room. So just so you guys know, each group will have approximately 8 students in it. And so that'll be how many students will be in the room. Most rooms have 1 facilitator, a couple have 2. And so each student will start by saying, what is their name? If you guys want to add something to it, that's great, for more information to learn about them, but also a one-word reflection. Once again, kind of getting back to our word cloud, but making it more personal. What's a one-word reflection after reading Medical Apartheid? Then we'll go into the discussion guide, and we'll look at that in a minute, but I've broken it into kind of 2 sections. The first half really thinks about the period of time of enslavement and how enslavement was used to practice and develop medicine. So once again, a lot of American culture has used enslavement for its benefit, and medicine has done the same thing. So we're going to be going through that section. And then the second section is kind of a more modernization. So post-enslavement, thinking about how have we continued to practice medicine? How has some of those things continued on? And how do we see in modern research some of these things playing out? And then our goal is to close the session once again, where everybody gets a chance to speak and have a one-word discussion of what their next step will be after this session. So then we're going to be coming back to the main group, and I'll show you in a minute how that'll work. And we will be doing a little bit of self-care, and we'll get a chance to have Felicia walk us through a wellness statement. I'm also, just so you guys know, I'll actually move this up a little bit higher. After the ground rules, I'm also going to tell students, we want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable. And like I said, it can sometimes be triggering or traumatizing for some of our students. So I'm going to ask students to have their cameras on throughout the session, specifically the small group session. But if there are moments that are hard or difficult, it's okay for them to turn off their camera and rejoin when they're ready. I'm also going to let them know that there is a 17th breakout room in which I'll be sitting in there. There won't be any kind of students assigned to me, but that room will be a place that if students just need a moment to kind of truly step away and debrief because something's hard, they can come and be with me in that breakout room, and I'll be available for them. And then I'm also going to have office hours that evening, and just so that if students have concerns that they don't want to leave the room, but do want to debrief in a more time kind of sensitive period and on a one-on-one manner, I'll have office hours that I can let students join me and have a discussion that evening. Once again, I'll do that before we go in the breakout room. Sorry, that's a little bit out of order. So then Felicia will do that mindfulness activity. And after that activity, where we've kind of focused more a little bit on self-care, and then we'll close up. And we'll close up once again reflecting on a more modern view. This is a picture from the period of talking about acres of skin, how people who were incarcerated were illegally used for or were also inappropriately motivated to participate in research without true consent from them. And so kind of bringing a more modern picture in at the end of this. And then our charge will be that, this is not a problem that's going to be fixed, but really this is a journey that all of us need to go on, and thinking about, the Buddhist proverb that the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step, and then asking all of our students to pick one step that will be their next step in this journey. So that's kind of the 10,000-foot overview of our session. Any questions about that?
So Andy, in that 90-minute section, are we allowed to have them take a break midway through? Because that's just a long time to.
Absolutely. And that's a good point. Maybe I'll put that in the reflection guide itself, and I'll make that adjustment for everybody. Thanks, Tracy. I think that's a great idea.
Will the students have a copy of these reflection questions ahead of time?
Yes, Tom, that's also a great question. So these are actually, so the answer is yes, but not in its final form. They actually answered more questions during their summer reading that included these questions. So these were questions that are a little bit more non-specific, so that students can kind of pull from any place in the book and kind of discuss them. There were also some very specific scenarios within the book that we had them reflect on. So they will actually come to this session having written at least each individually a paragraph about each of these questions. So they will have been primed with these for sure. One thing I will say is that my goal is at the end of this week, because we gave this to the students at the beginning of the summer, I'm going to be sending them at the end of this week kind of a reminder about these reflection questions, and also let them know kind of specifically which ones we're going to be focusing on for the book club. But they have been primed already.
So Andy, for the office hours, will you have additional resources available that you can direct the students to?
Yeah, and I would love to have any resources that people think would be valuable to share. And also, if anybody would be willing to be a resource, if students would kind of like to have a further conversation. Obviously, I'm a white male. I'm in charge of this course, so I need to be the person who is available. But if there is a process for people who would like to be part of that debriefing process, I'm happy to have that as well. But if there are specific resources people find very valuable, I'm happy to have those. I do have a collection that we've had over time as well. But if there's some things that kind of come to the top of your mind that you think would be very valuable, I'm happy to have those shared.
And will you also be providing reflection questions to the facilitators that have gone out?
Yeah, so my goal is to have a debrief with all of us as well. I know in the last time we did this, we kind of just tagged it on to the end of the session for people who could stay on, because that was when it's fresh in our minds. I'm happy to do that, but I'm also going to be respectful of people's time and send something out in the next week and see if I can set up a couple times, not just one time, but a couple times, so that if facilitators want to pop on and give feedback, that would be great. Noble, you got muted, sorry.
I'm sorry. Should we also have the facilitators, we more or less have a start off by introducing ourselves first before we go into the introduction side? That would be a part of the introduction, that we introduce ourselves first.
Yep, I agree. I think kind of as you're introducing kind of the ground rules, you're going to be introducing who you are. And I can put that more explicitly in there. And then doing the ground rules and then having the whole group introduce themselves. Perfect. Well, if it's okay with you guys, I'm gonna open up the discussion guide real quick and just kind of walk through that, so that if you guys have any specific questions, I know we already added a couple things to that portion. Okay, so can you see my screen once again? Perfect. So like I said, the session is going to start with this one-word reflection. I kind of said that it's going to be 5 to 10 minutes. It's going to be a little bit based on your room, but I wanted to leave some space because this is kind of building the groundwork for how this whole conversation is going. So if you feel like you want to add more than just the name and a one-word reflection, that's great. It's okay for this to be even a little bit longer time, because it's kind of where we actually start building the room together. And then we'll go straight into this first section. And really the focus of this first section is kind of thinking historically, how did medicine develop in early America, and how was racism connected to that? And even how do we think about how our medical education is connected to that? And so, once again, there's 5 reflection questions and there's a total of 30 to 40 minutes. You do not have to ask all of these questions, and it's okay if you just follow your room. This is kind of a starting place. It's a guide. So if you guys feel like there's one question that people are really digging into, and then also feel like there's another follow-up question that doesn't fall within this but would be helpful, that's totally appropriate. I gave you 5 so that if for some reason you have a room that is quiet and it's hard to they're not giving a lot of answers, you have a lot of different questions as options, as well as can pick and choose which ones you feel are most appropriate. Questions about this first section?
Yeah, so Andy, these 5 reflection questions, are these the reflection questions that you referenced early that have already gone out to the students?
Correct. There's actually 7 of them in this section. There were some more specific just scenarios. I think there was one specifically about Marion Sims, and then there was one that was specifically, I can't remember about what the other scenario was, but there were these 5 questions were within those reflection questions that they completed during the first section of the book. As they were reading, the goal was for them to write a 1-paragraph kind of statement about how they felt, or answering each of these questions was an expectation of what they were to do. And then I'm going to go ahead and put it in here based on Tracy's recommendation, because I think it's a great idea. We're going to do a break between the first and second session, first and second section. We can say students can turn off cameras. And what do you guys think? Do you think 5 minutes would be appropriate?
Yeah, that works.
And if someone needs to go to the bathroom or just needs a couple minutes. And then we'll go into the second section. And this one focuses more on kind of a little bit more of the modern expression of racism within research mostly. And so I picked, once again, these 4 questions, and it's kind of moving towards this culmination of what is your next action step. And so after this section, we will then go into kind of our closing portion, which is kind of like a bookend to how we started this, where we're going to ask everybody to give a 1-word statement about what is their next step. Now, obviously, often we say these 1 words, they say a word and then they explain it. So that's why it takes a little bit more time. But once again, I would leave yourself probably closer to 10 minutes just to make sure everybody has a chance to talk. And then the one thing I will say is I'm going to stop sharing this for 1 second because I want to show everybody how it actually is structured. You guys got an email that gave you an Excel file. And that Excel file is what is showing on the screen right now. This is what you will get and what the students will get as an email follow-up. We're getting this together and it will come out at the end of this week. And if you see there at the very top line, can you guys see my cursor? Basically, this first room is the large group session. And so this is what everybody will click in at 1 o'clock. And then at the end of your small group session, this is where they will click to return to the main group session. And then when you are in your small group, obviously you're assigned. So for instance, Tracy is here, she's in group number 1, and this is the link that her students and she will have. So when the large group session is over after Felicia has ended and I give the intro to what the small group discussion will look like, your students will leave the large meeting and then they will enter into their individualized Zoom link for their small group session. The big thing about this is facilitators will need to keep track of their time. And I will say that at the end of, as we're leaving the small group session, what does that 90-minute time frame look like as the end of it? Because you're going to need to keep track of that so that you can kind of know, hey, this is when we need to go back to the large group session. And you'll just instruct your students at the end of that they need to click back on the Zoom link to go back to the original session. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but Andy, so when we go into those small groups, would you be able to give us a time? That would be really helpful and say,
Yes.
We need to be back in this larger at this time.
Yep. And I'll put that into my PowerPoint just as a reminder to myself. So like if it's, let's say we get through that and Felicia does her section and then I do that kind of intro and let's say it's like 1:40, I'll give you guys a callback time that you need to be back by like 2:50 or 3 o'clock. I'll just do 90 minutes from that time. Sorry, I didn't do the math right, but I'll give you a very specific time saying, hey, this is when we would like everybody to be back. Now I will have these links. And so there will be a way that I can kind of at least pop into rooms and put some messages in the chat if we're running kind of past time, just to kind of let people know to wrap up. I would have to individually go into each of these rooms, so I probably won't do that for everybody. But if we do have some rooms that have kind of, because obviously you get into discussions, you lose track of time. We will have ways of kind of giving people feedback by popping into the room just to let them know that this large group session will be starting.
Okay. Andy, are we moving ourselves in and out from the large room to the small room, back to the large room?
Exactly, yeah. So these are individualized Zoom links. So they're their own. And the reason why we did this is this was easier. So when they did the racism in medicine course in the spring, this method just worked a lot better for moving students and making sure you had which students with which facilitators. It's really hard to actually do that within its own Zoom meeting. And so this was the best workaround we had.
Also, another question about the groups. You brought up the racism in medicine course. At times there was a lot of silence and, it was sort of, what are your thoughts about calling on students to participate versus, I mean, obviously we let them come to the conversation, but if it's sort of 2 minutes of silence, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. I mean, one of the things that could be a tool that might be before we call on direct students, could be even saying, okay, we're gonna have everybody in the room it sounds like everybody's thinking about this. No one has a clear idea yet. Let's all take another minute, and then we're going to just pop around the room and have everybody give, a brief so that everybody has to kind of answer. And I actually did that once in the course. And then that's kind of why we did the popcorn to start with, is because it kind of makes everybody at least start engaging the conversation. And I think it's a little bit, you have to kind of know your room a little bit to kind of say, because the other thing we don't want is to have like two people who answer every question, and we want other people to speak up too. And so I think there will be a time where you could even say, hey, I would really like to see if we can hear from some other people too, and see what other answers we have. And I will say that often our medical students, if you give them some silence, eventually someone will speak. And once they start speaking, it kind of dominoes a little bit.
Thank you. It's helpful.
Other questions about that? Perfect. So that's kind of the general overview of the course, and then specifically expectations as facilitators. Like I said, as we get closer, I'm going to send out a couple dates in the week after the session as debriefing. I'll probably try to do a morning and an afternoon again, so that we can get as many people as possible to pop on. And that could be even a time where you just pop on for as much time as you have available, just to share your feedback about how facilitating went, how the course went. And then also, if people have time, I'm happy to stay on after the session. We will definitely stop before 4 o'clock because the time won't take all of that. But, and so I'd be happy for anybody who can stay on and try to be respectful of stopping at 4. But if there's anybody who wanted to stay on to give some direct feedback right after, we can do that. Well, thank you all for spending some time. And if there's questions that arise, just feel free to email me. And I'll add those couple things in. So I put the break in the middle. I'll just put a reminder to introduce ourselves, and I'll put a link in to say what's the exact time frame for returning after the facilitator session.
So Andy, it's not necessary for us, the facilitators, to have this information, but since the students will be providing feedback vis-a-vis the reflection questions, will you or someone else be able to determine whether or not what the participation has been in terms of the written follow-up?
Yeah, and that's one thing that I'm working on in the background. That's why I'm trying to put students in rooms with facilitators, because there could be a possibility that we could even give you guys the ability to look at those reflection questions beforehand. But we're kind of just navigating, how we can do that. And so that's part of why I wanted to get all the matching up early, so that I can then work on the ability for facilitators to look at reflection questions as they come in.
Okay.
So not that it would be something you'd have to do, but it could be something that could be beneficial, even kind of to Donna's point, if people are quiet, you could know that people have answers that they've already thought through. And I think that's a great way of also addressing it, be like, these are questions that were part of that reflection paper. If you guys are a little bit stuck, why don't you go back to your reflection papers? You could even open that up and take a look and see, what were things that you had thought through, because they may not remember at the top of their mind, but they should have access to that. And we could even start the session just to remind them of that.
Yeah, and vice versa. You wouldn't want to load the facilitators with, say, 3 of the 8 students, and those 3 that did not necessarily participate fully in the written response part.
That's true.
Kind of spread the wealth around to all the facilitators.
Very good point. Any other questions or comments?
No, I'm anxious to participate in the discussion on this book.
I'm